Essentially, critical race theory is moving toward the breakdown of the American Republic, okay? And they want to break down the idea of also capitalism as well. They want to bring in an idea of a socialist nation, a communist nation. And what Cheryl Harris has proposed is that she wants to suspend private property rights. She wants to seize land and wealth and redistribute them along racial lines.
How many of you were at the panel discussion that was moderated by C.L. Bryant? Did you enjoy it? So we have had some wonderful feedback on that event. We had Twan Jones, we had C.L. Bryant, we had Leah Hull, and we had Eddie Huff, and they were talking about some of the difficult subjects that's facing Tulsa right now with the 100-year anniversary of the race riot. Juneteenth was coming up. Sometimes that can cause some friction in the community, unfortunately. And then this whole thing about critical race theory. And sometimes these are uncomfortable topics to discuss, but we said we need to dive in head first. We need to have these discussions. They're important. We need to be productive, and we need to hear both sides of the issue. And that's especially why we asked Twan to come, and he did a wonderful job expressing his views and opinion. I came away with a much better understanding of where he was coming from. And so I think that it was very productive for all of us to be there. But we heard over and over again that there was a rock star standout on that panel. And that was Leah Hull. And people just absolutely loved, give it up. People loved your perspective, Leah. They loved the fact that she brought in history. She grounded her statements in fact and really gave cogent arguments as to why she believes the way that she believes and what she had to share with us. So Leah she's like myself. She's a California refugee. That's what I like to call us. She lives in Broken Arrow now. She has your master's in in education. She is well-traveled, well-read, well-spoken, and so I want to welcome to our 912 breakfast, Miss Leah Hull.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, and I'm just honored to be here. And Rhonda, thank you so much for just giving me the opportunity. I want you guys to feel comfortable eating your breakfast. I will try to enunciate and project as much as possible. I have a lot to cover. I have notes, so if I don't make eye contact with you all the time, just know that I have a lot to cover, and we're going to move forward. It's going to be brick and mortar, old school, because obviously we don't have any technology, but I think you guys are good with that. So I will try not to bore you guys too much, but I don't want to go backwards. I believe that we really need to go forward. We need to have strategies moving forward, and we need to know what we need to do moving forward. Okay, I think unfortunately we get bogged down in just dialogue sometime, and dialogue is good, but dialogue, you need to have objectable, measurable strategies to move forward. Okay, so how did we get here? Okay, how did we get here where critical race theory has infiltrated most of our cultural and societal institutions? Well, for the past decade, this has become the default ideology in our public institutions. It's been interjected into our government agencies, into our public school systems, into teacher training programs, into human resource diversity programs as well. It is public policy framework, and it's also been hidden in the Common Core agenda. Okay, so if you guys remember, with the start of Obama administration, we had the rollout of Common Core. Okay, and what Common Core did was that without even most states even seeing what that curriculum was, those states were forced, in essence, to accept 46 states did. 46 states accepted Common Core, and what that did was allowed for the federal pipeline of money to now be
put into the school systems, okay? So basically, if you take our Common Core, then you will get federal aid, okay? But what Common Core did, and let me read this quote because he says it a lot better than me. So what Common Core did was it helped to establish a direct pipeline between local schools and the federal government and guaranteed that the federal tax money that flowed from Washington through the states and ultimately to the districts was dependent not only on what the schools were teaching, but on how they were teaching it. For the first time in American history, the federal government had a controlling interest in forcing all schools to align and standardize curriculum and to regularize and politicize pedagogy. This is the Common and Common Core. Okay, so that's how we got here. Okay, so it's infiltrated our cultural and societal institutions. It's also infiltrated our language. Okay, our language and our politics. You've heard over the last 10 years and more, but essentially these euphemisms. Okay, so we hear things like equity. Okay, sounds nice, right? Social justice sounds real nice, doesn't it? Diversity and inclusion, correct? And what about cultural responsive teaching for those of you that have been in higher education or in, public school? There is this consistent, we must include, we must diversify, okay? However, critical race theorists are just, all they are just masters at language divination. That's what I like to say. They're language constructionists or language reconstructionists, okay? So unfortunately, neo-Marxism is a very hard sell in America. Okay, neo-Marxism was going to be a very hard sell in America. But what wasn't going to be a hard sell was to introduce, as I said, these non-threatening dialogues and discourses. So, for example, equity can be easily confused with the American principle of equality. Yes. Okay. So the distinction is vast and different. So equality, something that I said going back to the panel, is that equality was codified in the Declaration of Independence. Okay. We fought for it in the American Civil War. We made sure that it was, again, codified in our laws with the amendments, the 14th and 15th Amendment, and also the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 64 and 65. Explicitly, critical race theorists reject the idea of equality, okay? When they reject the idea of equality, to them it just represents discrimination, and it just is the idea that white supremacy is still operating, okay? It's a subtle deception posing as truth, okay? So in contrast to equality, equity is defined or promoted as little more than reformulated Marxism. So Cheryl Harris is a UCLA professor, and she is the one, she's really pioneered the critical race theory. What she's proposed, and many of you guys have heard this, is that essentially critical race theory is moving toward the breakdown of the American Republic, okay? And they want to break down the idea of also capitalism as well. They want to bring in an idea of a socialist nation, a communist nation. And what Cheryl Harris has proposed is that she wants to suspend property rights, private property rights. She wants to seize land and wealth and redistribute them along racial lines, okay? So you also, I'm sure you've heard of Ibram Kendi, who is the critical race guru. He also directs the Center for the Anti-Race Research at Boston University. He has proposed the creation of the Federal Department of Anti-Racism. We do not want this. Number one, we have a system of checks and balances that is operated quite well, despite partisan issues, but is operated quite well for 245 years. Okay, we have an excellent system of checks and balances. We have the executive, and I'm sure I don't need to go over this, but we have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Our framers formed those boundaries to protect the government in which we have. Okay, what Kendi wants to do is that this department would end up being independent of the elected branches.
okay? And it would have the power to nullify, veto, or abolish any law at any level of government and curtail the speech of political leaders and others who they deem anti-racist. Do we see how dangerous this is? Okay, this is beyond cancel culture, because now cancel culture has been codified within American law. Okay, no longer can I just say, you know, I don't agree with you. Not only I don't agree with you, but now there's a law to back me. We need to be very careful of this, okay? So one practical result of the creation of such a department would overthrow capitalism, since according to Kendi, in order to be truly anti-racist, you also have to be truly anti-capitalist. So in other words, identity, and this is something that I spoke about very much in the panel, is that this is an idea of identity-based government, okay? So I am black, or I am white, I am poor, or I am rich, I came from this side, or I came from this side. It's about identifying yourself based on an outward identifier. Okay, again, as I said before, because my biblical world, or excuse me, because the Bible frames my worldview, I operate under the fact that we are a one kingdom. Once you are accepted into the kingdom of Christ, you are one people. Okay, so he doesn't see Jew, he doesn't see Gentile, he doesn't see black, he doesn't see yellow, he doesn't see orange, he doesn't see anything. He sees his one restored and redeemed people. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been, well, as we all should, but I've been going through my Bible plan, and I've been in my Old Testament, and that can get very dry. We'll just say that, okay? The first five books. And I say that only because it's a consistent rundown, if you notice, of the genealogy and or laws. So this last time, as I was reading through it, I asked the Lord, why am I having to go through the genealogy? Please explain to me, what do you want me to know about the genealogy? And he said this time, he told me two things. I'm less concerned with you knowing about the actual genealogy. What I want you to understand is, number one, these tribes knew who their father was, or they knew who they worshipped, okay? They knew who they had their principles set. And yes, they deviated many times, but they had principles, and they held to those. That was the first thing. The second thing is that the tribe, if you know this, there's 12 different tribes, and they are very different. Not once in the Bible are they ever identified by their skin color. And I would ascertain that there was probably a multitude and a plethora of colors in that desert, okay? And I asked the Lord, and I said, well, explain that a little bit more to me. And so he did. And he said, that is what the kingdom looks like. It is made up of, and we know this, it's biblical, it's made up of all tribes, all nations, all people coming under one principle, under one biblical kingdom. And that's really spoken to me, because one thing that CL said is that the word that we don't hear anymore, we don't hear the word melting pot. In the 80s and the 90s, growing up, in my history and civics class, we heard the word melting pot. It was crucial to understanding what America was. It was crucial to understanding where we came from. It was crucial to understanding that first dinner that happened at what we consider now Thanksgiving. It was crucial to the conversations and even the treaties. And I know that it is hard history when you look at American history, but it is crucial to America, okay? So let's move on, because I kind of digress. That's why I stay on my notes. Okay, so an equity-based form of government would mean the end of not only private property, but essentially individual rights, equality under law, federalism, and freedom of speech. What they want to be replaced with is race-based redistribution of wealth, group-based rights, active discrimination, and omnipotent, and this is the main thing, omnipotent bureaucratic authority. What we've seen over the last 10, 20, 30 years is the infiltration of federal government and the overreach into daily life, okay? And what that translates into daily state sovereignty, okay? State sovereignty has been unable to operate under what the Federalist Papers have given us, and also what the Declaration of Independence codified for us again. Okay, so historically, the accusation of anti-Americanism has been overused. But in this case, it's not a matter of interpretation. Critical race theory prescribes a revolutionary program that does want to overturn the principles of the American Republic. It wants to destroy the Declaration, and it wants to continue to destroy the remaining structure of the Constitution. Okay, so again, heavy, okay? Very heavy. Where do we go from there, and what are the strategies to march forward? It's very simple. Honestly, Rhonda has done a great job. Having organizations like this, Project 912, going to meetings, Men Republican Club. I don't see any Women's Republican Club. So getting involved at your grassroots level is what's going to make a difference. Dialogue, communication. Okay, that's what's going to make the difference. But I digress. So there are 3 parts to a successful strategy to defeat the forces of critical race. We want government action. Okay, so last year it was rescinded at the beginning of Biden's administration, but last year President Trump did issue an executive order banning critical race theory in training-based programs and the federal government. As I said, Biden did rescind this order on his first day in office, but what it did was it gave a motto, okay? It gave a motto to state governors, or to governors, and it also gave a motto to elected officials as to legislation that they can write. And what we need to remember is that in Oklahoma, Governor Stitt signed Stitt signed into law the ability not to teach critical race theory. However, it is up to our legislators to enforce that, and our school board members, or excuse me, our school board members in each district to enforce that. So it's not, and remember, the federal government, the states have sovereignty, and the states can reject, as we've seen Texas do, states can reject federal oversight, okay? And if you've looked at Texas, Texas has consistently rejected federal oversight over the last 6 to 8 months, okay? So we need to stand up as states, and we need to operate underneath or within our state sovereignty, and we need to stand up because our governor has given us the backbone and the authority to make sure that critical race theory does not go any further. But it starts with our legislators, and then making sure that our school board elected officials will uphold what the parents and the families want and the communities want for their districts. There's also, and like Tulsa Public Schools is working with 1 or 2 lawyers I've been told of just recently, but they're working, they said also get with attorneys to file lawsuits against schools and government agencies that impose critical race theory. I don't know if any of you guys follow Candace Owens, but she also said when this, especially LBGT and the rest of the alphabet, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I honestly cannot remember. And then also with critical race theory, we can uphold the administration to a level of judicial review, because in essence, it is sexual education, okay? And so you need to report not the teacher, but the administration and the school to DHS, okay? And because it is sexual education. Okay, and they are teaching our children sexual education, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't hit like on the coast, like West and East Coast, this 3 years old age, but that is diabolical. Okay, that is diabolical. And the sad thing, and again, I'm going to digress, but I remember as I was coming up in my teaching program, they would always say, and this is why it's almost disgusting, but they would almost say, when you teach or when you create anything, make sure that anywhere from a 3-year-old to a 103-year-old can understand you. So that tells me that people know the importance of childhood development. okay? The childhood development, and I tell my children all the time, you guys are sponges. They're like, we're a sponge. I'm like, you guys will pick up anything and everything. And they're meant to be. It's part of their development. It is a section of their life where they are highly impressionable, okay? So again, I digress, but if you hear that those things are being taught in your grandchildren or your children's schools, then report it, because it is sexual education. Okay, and it is against the law, and there are avenues that you can take to protect your children and your grandchildren. Okay, so the Coalition of Attorneys, and they would be able to help you with creating legislation for First Amendment, which would protect citizens from compelled speech, the 14th Amendment, which provide equal protection under the law, and then the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which would prohibits public institutions from discriminating on the basis of race, okay? So again, we have things already codified into our law that we need to use and stand on and operate, okay? So on a grassroots level, we need to have multiracial, bipartisan coalitions where we have people from multiple sides of the table coming to speak. Because if you can put a name and a face to Twan, next time you may have, because if there's a fear to speak to someone or maybe just a hesitation, but if you can put a face and an identity to a person and understand where they're coming from, oftentimes dialogue is a little bit easier, okay? So just making sure that we continue with these multicultural coalitions, and also making sure that we are on that grassroots level, making sure that we're hitting not just those that we know that think and believe as us, but also those ones that there's tension maybe there. They don't know. Maybe they're sitting on the fence because no one has talked to them. So, and as I was saying, I think to Lori, I was talking about, again, going back to a Bible study, and Miss Alina, she remembers this, but oftentimes we struggle with, how do we walk into these situations? And I'm always reminded, I'm not God, and thank God I'm not. I'm not God, but God requires us and asks us to be like Jesus, okay? And I even said this, well, does that mean that every time I should walk in with my whip ready to overturn tables and not wear my mask? And yes, sometimes, but also no, because most of the time, what did Jesus do? He gathered people around him and he told a story. And I think it's time that we begin to tell our story, our collective melting pot, multicultural, 45 years in 2 weeks, our story, okay? It is time to tell the story of America, okay? That's on the grassroots level. Okay, and then what we need to make sure is that the main focus is that we need to tear down this idea that it's race essentialism, but race is essential to everything. It is not essential. It is not essential to the functionality of life. Okay, it is not essential. With this, we need to tear down this idea, and CL spoke about this, and also Eddie, but this idea of collective guilt, both on the white side and like collective oppressed guilt on the black side. Twan said it Eddie and CL said it very well. There's a gullibility that has been released over white people, okay? Stop feeling bad for things. Okay, the Lord, and I'm going to go Christian with you, but the Lord, once you're redeemed and restored, there's no guilt, there's no shame. There's a daily renewing of your mind that happens. You don't go back to your sins the day before and steep in them. You are renewed. He says daily, renewed. My mercies are new every morning. So if they're renewed every morning, then let's operate in that. And I say that with the most humility, and I know I'm speaking to the choir because I'm pretty certain that most of you guys are not going around apologizing for things that happened years and years ago, okay? What I do see is that there has been a collective want and need to have understanding with one another. What I do see is that there's a collective need and want to bring this nation back to a place that we recognize. What I do see is a collective want and need to have morality and principle back in. And there's a collective need to get back to what our founding fathers did. And as I said at the panel, you have to believe that what the Lord did with our founding fathers is a miracle, and it was providential. Okay? And I'll say it again. He swept into the history of man. He swept into the history of man and created and established something that no nation and no people had seen and were unable to continue if they had not had the provincial guiding them. Okay, and so again, I digress, but we must understand that it was a provincial miracle as he stepped down into American history, okay? And we now have a responsibility and a stewardness to walk that out and to continue that, okay? Lastly, so in terms of principles, we need to employ our own language. We need to start employing our own moral language. We need to take back words. Like, for instance, there's been this really big, strong thing to take back the rainbow. Tell the truth of the rainbow, okay? Tell the real story of the rainbow, okay? So let's take back, and again, as I said earlier, it's subtle deceptions. So easy that many generations, multitudes of generations are being deceived. So subtle deceptions. And if we remember back to the beginning, the serpent never said anything to Eve other than really brought doubt. Really all he said was, did he really say not to eat the apple? So in the end, it just brings us a period of doubt, a little bit of deception. Okay, so let's not be deceived any longer. So take back our languages, take back our moral positioning, take back our laws and operate and use them and function within them. Okay, that was a lot. Do you want me to slow down? Do we have questions? Okay, I've got a little bit into Juneteenth if we want, but if we've got questions, let's do questions.
Questions? Who has questions? Okay, Elena, get up here.
Hang on, Elena. I'll bring you the...
Oh, the magic microphone.
All
Sit
right.
down with you.
That's right. Leah, you're amazing, and I'm so glad we got acquainted and worked together. So, being that history buff, what I'm missing here, a little portion, is that 1600, back in the 1600s, what is it in this critical race theory that is so about slavery being the first thing that happened in America? I need a tool to combat that.
Okay, so this is the whole thing. They want history either starts at 1619 in Jamestown, if you're critical race theory, or if you are a born and bred American patriot, it starts at Plymouth. Okay, so this is, I'm going to take you down 1619 history. It's very simple. Oppressed and oppressors. That's all. Black versus white. No, I'm just kidding. So 1619 history essentially states American history started in 1619 when the settlers landed in Jamestown. When those white male settlers landed in Jamestown, they brought slavery with them. One thing that I was going to say with Juneteenth, and let me just get his actual quote. But this, it says, proponents of critical race theory are peddling the falsehood that America's history is rife with inherent racism, all the way back to the first settlers' arrival on our shores, starting at 1619. So the movement has gained so much steam that even a sitting U.S. Senator, Senator Tim Kaine, a Democrat of Virginia, claimed that the United States didn't inherit slavery from anybody, we created it. So that, again, subtle deception and a bold-faced lie, because if you know anything about world history, slavery has been unfortunately an issue since, I don't know, Moses and the Israelites. And again, it is a human issue that is still plaguing our global community. So, but let me answer your question. So, 1619, history started in Jamestown. We had white settlers that came to Jamestown. They brought slavery, started slavery, and slavery is now an inherent problem only of the United States. Okay? If you come over here to the actual history, American history begins in Plymouth, essentially. We have white settlers, families that were coming from the British to escape what? Religious tyranny, okay, religious persecution. They were actually a multitude and a plethora of different religions, okay, still Eurocentric, but based out of Europe, okay? Those people were Christians, Christian principles, and were coming to the United States with the idea of a new world, a new life, okay? They brought biblical principles with them and stepped into a relationship with the Native Americans that were there. And we know the story of our first Thanksgiving, essentially this wonderful time of two nations coming together. Is American history rife with tensions with the Native Americans? Absolutely, okay? And as I said, I love talking about this because I'm Indian, Native American, I'm Black, and I'm also very European. And so, to me, I love my country. I love this country, and I love the history, and I love the nation because it has created what I see here and what I see here. So I love this nation. So when my history starts in Plymouth, because I see two nations, biblical as well, coming together to form the foundations, the beginning of this nation. There are still many years that we need to walk through. We fought the Declaration. We actually split from King George, but that was there. That is our history. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
You can have a follow-up.
I just didn't, what I wanted to know was, and you did answer, what is the critical race theory? What is their version? Because I got our version.
So that,
but their
that
version,
is their version, so that they can continue this race-baited historical narrative. Because the idea is to make sure that you are the oppressor, I am the oppressed. You are the oppressor, I am the oppressed. And it's an inherent system that is part of American ideal. Okay?
Other questions? Okay. Come back.
Huh? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that Governor Stitt had passed the law, but it was up to the individual school boards to enact that.
Yes.
So I have been to a school board meeting where I spoke on my opinion about the mask, but they don't respond back. So how do you get them to respond back so that you know what they are saying or what they are planning versus just giving my side of the story saying, I don't want this?
So first thing in school board meetings, because this actually happened in Tulsa Public Schools, and there's a little bit of problem just with reading the bylaws. But according, and I'm not sure of yours because I don't know your district, but when a Broken Arrow, but when a individual from the community or citizen wants to speak, they're supposed to just be making a statement, and they're not really supposed to be speaking to the people, and then they're not supposed to be expecting a statement, dialogue or statement back. However, there are avenues that you can take. So like things that you need to do is you need to operate under the Open Records Act, and you need to demand, or not demand, but you need to have, you need to get those records that you need that states that, hey, Broken Arrow is doing this, or find out what their curriculum is doing. Another thing, honestly, and I say this, but stalk, in a good way, their Facebook, their social media accounts. Because what you'll hear is language, and you'll begin to hear, but you'll also see where their principles lie. So you'll get to kind of know who these people are, where they're lining, on what side of the line they are coming from. The next thing, as I said, get in contact with local lawyers or attorneys that what's the word, that promote, that are
supportive.
Thank you. Yes, that are supportive of our causes, and ask them to look over or see if they can help write language that you can bring to school board. Do you want me to talk about?
Well, the one thing I did want to mention as well is the thing that we continue to push is the need to build relationships with your elected officials, and that includes your school board. So find out who your school board member is, invite them out for a cup of coffee, and sit down and start talking to them, because it's when we start building relationships that we can start making a difference. But right now they see us as the enemy because we see them as the enemy as well. And so I think that because it's so difficult to flip school boards, because of the length of their term, and there's no recall ability. So it can take upwards of 4 to 8 years to be able to change it, to flip a school board, because only one person usually is up for re-election each year. We're very fortunate in Tulsa Public Schools this go round. We have 2. And I promise you, if we can flip these 2 seats, if we can take these 2 seats in Tulsa, along with Dr. Jerry Griffin and I believe Janetta Marshall, I think that we can start taking the school board back at Tulsa Public Schools, and that is going to create a rippling effect throughout our community. So find out who your school board member is, contact them, and ask them, hey, can we go out for coffee, and just kind of get a feel for where they are.
Leah, can you speak also to curriculum? What can we as activists do to influence the curriculum that the schools are using? Because I think that what we put in the hands of our children, I know it's mostly in tablet form anymore, but the curriculum that they're using, that they're following, that the kids are reading, the textbooks and various things they're reading, has a really dynamic, obviously, impact on what they're learning.
So again, you need to go to wherever your children or your grandchildren are, you need to go to that school's website, and you need to review their curriculum. There's no magic pill. There's not going to be anything else that you can do. You need to look at the curriculum and look at the books and the material, the resources that they're teaching out of. I'll kind of digress if you let me for a second, but Glenda Mims, correct? She brought in an article. Was it the tribute? She left it on the desk? Okay, but she brought in an article, and essentially the article was stating that, yes, the Tulsa race riots, what has been in Oklahoma history school books, never been taken out, and it's always been available at the public school level. And so, and I looked at the books that they had in there, and I'll tell you this, I've taught out of 2, and I learned out of 1. So I was taught, you know, in my school age, I was taught out of 1, and I taught from 2 of them. The Tulsa race riots is mentioned in each one of those books. The issue that comes is, unfortunately, over the last 20 or 30 years, and I mean no disrespect if you or your husband were a coach, but unfortunately civics and American history were taught by coaches, and it's not it's just a reality. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not saying that pigskin is more important, but we did make an idol of a sort, and we've seen the fallout from that. So again, my idea would be we need to teach real history, and we need to make sure that we have civic-minded leaders in those history as teachers. It's so important because, as I've said, my quote, the philosophy that kids are growing up with today, that's the government of tomorrow. So all those kids, and I've kind of said it jokingly, I grew up, you walked into world history, we watched Monty Python. That was I'm not kidding, and I love it. It's funny, I have a lot of dry humor from Monty Python, but it is not historically accurate. We watch, what is it? Is it Legends of the Fall or the Wolves? Yes, that was American history. I mean, that was Native American history. I mean, so there is there has been a fallout of basic civic in American history, and even Oklahoma history. So I go back all the way. Tulsa race riots has always been taught in Oklahoma history classes, and and what we need to do is make sure to answer the foundation question is make sure you are looking over that curriculum. Okay, make sure you're looking over that curriculum, and when your kids are coming home or your grandchildren are coming home with, like I've noticed, unfortunately, there's a lot of jinx. It's not in your face, but one of my daughters, there's just this constant, all the time, women have never had a place in history. And if you allow me to digress just real quick, we went to Old Navy. We're buying some shirts, and one says like "Women rule the world," which honestly, I really don't like those kind of shirts because I'm just like too much Beyonce in it, too much new age kind of stuff. Not really my kind of thing. But she kind of fought me on it. I allowed her to have it. But as we're fighting on it, she's like, "No, I need it because women don't have a right, and they don't have a voice, and they don't do." And I said, "What?" And she's 8, mind you. And I was like, what social justice warrior are you? Because what are we doing right now in Old Navy? But I immediately redirected her and I said, what history are you listening to? Because the history I've taught you, biblical history, women are talked about all the time. There's Mary, there's Deborah, there's Jael, there's Esther, there is Lydia, okay, there's Ruth, there's Naomi. I mean, there's women in the Bible. So what history are you learning that women are not renowned in history? Because the Deborah, okay? Let's talk about Deborah for a second. Men wouldn't even go into battle unless they knew Deborah was coming with her or coming with them. Okay, so that's the history I walk out of. My God respects, he's not a respecter of people, but he does restore men and he restores women and he redeems men and redeems women so that they can be used. Okay, so I say all that, check the curriculum.
Excellent. Peggy?
I don't have a question, but I have a couple of comments.
Yes, ma'am.
First of all, if you went out on the street today and asked people the story of the rainbow, you might get 2% of the population that even knows the biblical story of the rainbow. So that's why they've been able to co-opt it, okay? The other thing is, we learned a very bitter lesson with Common Core. Yes, there was a group of people that fought for 2 years to get Common Core outlawed in the state of Oklahoma. And yes, we have a law in the books against Common Core, but Common Core is in every school in Oklahoma because there's no teeth in the law. And the Stitt law, the law Mr. Stitt just signed about critical race theory will be the same thing unless we're poking our noses into the curriculum and washing them and calling them out. Because trust me, they will ignore the law because there's really no definitive punishment for not putting it in the curriculum.
And she said it perfectly. There's no teeth in the law. So, I mean, it's there, but that's why I said you need to speak with your legislators and your elected officials and your school board elected officials to enforce that. You have to bring it to them and say, we know what you're doing, okay? We know the language. We see it. We see the outcome in our students. We want you to stop, and this is what we need you to do.
Just real quick.
Yes.
That is also, they changed the language. Okay, when we defeated Common Core, you would go and talk to school board members or whatever, and you would talk to them about Common Core, and they'd say, "Oh, we don't teach Common Core. You know, we teach Oklahoma standards." Anybody want to guess what Oklahoma standards are? Common Core. So what they do is they change the language so that then we feel like we're ignorant or we're unknowing, and we're going to be quiet and they want us just to shut up and sit down and let them continue to do what they're doing. And that's why it's important. While we're talking about critical race theory, I can promise you're not going to find that in any verbiage in any of the school board meetings. It's going to be under something totally different. Right.
Can I expand on that? Yeah. So we have a friend in Broken Arrow with an English class where the requirement was to read The Lord of the Flies. And the requirement for the paper that was to be done after The Lord of the Flies was read, had suggested sentences for each to introduce the concept for each paragraph of this paper. The paper was to explain how the writer of The Lord of the Flies was commenting on white supremacy and white colonialism, and that was repeated at least 3 times required in this paper. Only one student didn't have to produce the paper, and everyone else was required and was graded on their sad attempts because nobody could figure it out. And that was the one family who found it and raised an objection and raised a stink, and they're still raising a stink in Broken Arrow. So it's hidden. They're just not going to call it that, but it's gonna be there. And remember, folks, we are taxpayers. Now, I won't comment on the fact that tax-funded public schooling is illegal, but we have a right to speak our minds about the curriculum taught other people's children because it's our money funding it. So remember, we don't have to stay silent just because we don't have kids in the school. We have every right to be there.
That's right.
Usually I hold them in. Hi, I'm Steve Malinowski, and I heard Dr. Griffin speak the other night, over there at the Golden Corral, and he said he was the only conservative Republican on the Tulsa school board, and what he was kind of hinting to, and I think, was that there is needed to be 2, so that one can introduce a topic for discussion, the other one can second the motion for it, and then they have to bring it up for discussion.
Yeah.
Right.
And yet he had the opportunity to do that the other night, and he didn't. So,
one last question.
throw that out there.
Regarding the Tulsa Public bond issue,
yes.
Are we pursuing getting the forensic audit?
Yeah, so I've actually been working with Tulsa Parent Voice, and then they have a sister organization that's heading them, and they have different coalitions in different districts within Oklahoma. But we met on Monday, and actually, again, let me get into my notes, and I'm sorry, just my life is in my phone, and my notes are always right there. But the things that we're deciding for this upcoming legislative session would include, so we want to make sure that, okay, so we're going to make sure that coming into the next legislative session, we do want to make sure that we can get it into school board law or code or whatever, that we can rescind school board election positions. This is something that they can be rescinded, recalled, but that is what we're wanting to bring to the next legislative session. You've heard of school choice or the voucher system. We're beginning to write legislation, or excuse me, we wrote legislation last year, which was the transfer bill. I don't know if any of you heard of that, but essentially in a public school, if you want, you can transfer your student to any other public school. This kind of lays the foundation for a school choice or a school voucher system program to work. But again, we're going to pass this, we're going to open that up more in this next legislative session. Excuse me.
Oh, no, I just wanted to tell you, Elena, that I am working with a couple of legislators as well to push for the forensic audit, because if it comes from a legislator and it goes to either the AG or the governor, then more than likely it will happen. But so we're attacking this on numerous fronts because our goal is to straighten it up.
And then also there's because this is no longer a bipartisan, it's not a partisan issue, it's a bipartisan issue. We're working with, honestly, I don't want to say like Democrats and Republicans, but we're working with parents in our communities because they're seeing critical race theory is not a Democrat-Republican issue. This is an American or a people issue. So that would be the next thing, is to making sure that we're working with the parents and communities in the district to make sure that critical race theory is not pushed any further.
There's a question here, and then we have one gentleman here.
Okay, I wanted to mention an organization that's out there called Open the Books, and they have, every dime online in real time, where they can give us information about the salaries of every public individual. And I think that transparency is what we need. I mean, if people start hearing just some of the crazy numbers out there. I heard this at a meeting before the bond issue was on the books, that for the ratio of staff to students in TPS is 1 to 4.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so bizarre. We just have to get it out. But anyway, when I heard about this Open the Books organization, which they're fantastic, I got the URLs. I went online and bought Transparency Oklahoma and Transparency Tulsa. And I just think we should somehow get together with these Open Books guys and get that information online about start with one school district, TPS, start putting those numbers online and telling people where they are.
Now, they will tell you that they are online. They'll tell you that their numbers are online. You can see how they spend their money. But
online in a way. I went to school board meetings and they have everything so cloaked up, a
So one
5-page agenda with big margins so that you can't see what's really going on.
So one strategy that they said was, it's so important that we have our own independent websites. So like, for example, and I'm not just using Parent Voice, but for example, for the bond, they very quickly created their own website and literally just listed the information. And for a lot of people, they just sat there and just scrolled, and they said it was very easy. But it's so important that what she's saying is true. We've got to gather and compile, because a lot of times it's cloaked, it's hidden, you can't make sense of it. And once people start getting an understanding, they pull that information off and you can never find it again. So if we have it filed somewhere, proof, then we can show, no, this is what you're doing. You may have removed it from public view, but we know what's happening behind the scenes.
I think the Open Books people can help us to, how to format that for
and that is one
visibility.
Yes, and that is one of the things too that Parent Voice is working on. So again, Tulsa Public Schools has a bond committee, but those bond committees are chosen by the school district, the school board members, and then approved by Deborah Gist. I actually tried to get on. Mr. Croissant rejected me, and he said, we're really just wanting people within our district. However, Parent Voice said, no, we need to have, regardless if you're in our district or outside of our district, we want our own bond committee that comes from parents, guardians, people within the community coming together to look at that. So we would have another bond committee or another oversight committee that would make sure that there's transparency and that we have the ability to see what's going on in our districts.
We'll make this our last question.
Last year,
Oh, okay. So then Larry.
last year there was a move about in the legislature to write into state law that all school board elections will be held in the general election. Whatever happened to that, and what's the chances of it happening?
I don't think it made it.
Yeah.
I don't think it made it to the floor for a vote, but I will bring that up with one of the legislators that I'm working with and see what we can do about getting it out there, because that's important. That the elections for school board, for any bonds and stuff like that, they need to be held on the same day as a general election, because I will tell you that the school bond passed with, there were 17,000 people that got out and voted out of a potential of 138,000 voters. So we had 12% turnout. So you allowed for 17,000 people to make the decision on property taxes in the city of Tulsa, people that attend in the Tulsa School Board District. You allowed 17,000 people to make a decision on whether or not your property taxes went up or down.
I'm very interested in that issue. Would it be okay if you gave the name of that legislator you're working with?
Sheila Dills.
Really?
By the way,
And
I put this out on social media, and one of the comments was that, gee, all the employees of Tulsa Public Schools voted in the bond issue.
Yeah. All 17,000.
Leah, why don't you tell us where people can review the most recently adopted curriculum approved by the Oklahoma State Textbook Selection Committee? Just tell them where.
Where?
See that, yeah.
So they should be on each district's website.
I mean,
the curriculum.
Okay. I'm talking about physically. For years and years, it's been in a room down at the OSU Tulsa campus on Greenwood. I haven't been down there in a couple of years. A year or two ago, it was still there. I can't promise you that's where it is today, but I'm saying it's always available somewhere in Tulsa. They've moved it several times, but that's not all the curriculum. That doesn't tell you what your district's using for a given class, but it's each year the committee approves curriculum for different grade levels and different subjects, but it's the curriculum that's been approved in the latest year, and the last year's approvals. Well, I mean, that's the trouble is, yeah, it's a lot harder to review now because much of it's software. But it's in there's different form. But the physical textbooks are there, and other lists of curriculum that's been approved is there. Anyway, I'm just going to say that's always interesting because if you just want to get away, if you want to get away from the world, get off to yourself for a while. Go to that room and review the curriculum approved by, because you'll be by yourself.
And your hair will probably curl when you see what they have approved. So, yeah.
Well, I just want to make a statement. We teach in prisons, and about 5 weeks ago, we were able to go back in after COVID, and we teach behavior modification classes, and we have a new curriculum which includes all the sex language that you would ever want to hear. And we are just choosing.
That's what they need in prison, right?
We're in prison. You know, I mean, it is even in prison now.
Wow.
Wow. Wow. Well, y'all, let's give a big round of applause for Leah. She did a fabulous job today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. I love having a packed house. This was absolutely phenomenal. Thanks for rolling with it, with the air conditioning and the doors and everything. We will see you on the 4th at the event for Liberty Center. Hope you can be there for that. And otherwise, we will see you at the second Thursday, 9/12 meeting. We'll be back at the embassy. So we'll see you there. Take care.